Hello everybody, welcome to our fifth and final video in the series of handling currency conversion in Power BI using DAX and or PowerQuery. Since this is the fifth video in the series, I thought it would be good to do a quick little recap of the other videos, since this final one will kind of build on everything we've done so far. So if you haven't taken time to watch those previous four, I strongly recommend it. If not, I think you should be able to pick up some tricks and tidbits here, but it would be easier if you had a working knowledge of what we're working with here going into it. So here's a quick recap of what we did so far. The first video, we just did some basic currency conversion to, I believe, 10 to 15 currencies. Since this was the introduction video, we assumed that our currency rates table did not have any missing rates. So we had a rate for every single day of the week, every day of the year, nothing missing for the weekends or holidays, which may or may not be the case. But since this was video one, the introduction one, we decided to just assume that was true. After that, we did a video on how to take our converted measure, in our case it was total sales, and appropriately format it to the currency selected. So instead of having, I believe we had 10 currencies or something like that, and having 10 different measures all formatted using whatever the currency should be, we showed a way to use Excel and some DAX to combine it all together. So you only have to have a couple of measures and it will format it on the fly for you. There's pros and cons of each, but go ahead and take a look at that video if that's something that might be interesting to you as well. And in our third video, we got a little more complicated. We assumed that our currency rate table had missing days in it. Probably the weekends, could be holidays as well. So we needed a way to account for that, because if you go and convert a measure, say sales in our case here, and there's no currency rate for whatever currency you've selected, that day of sales or whatever it may be would fail to get converted. So if you go to compare different currencies, it would not be a fair comparison, since only the sales that were in the base currency, in our case US dollar, would be present in all the sales. So it could be kind of misleading. Well, actually it would be misleading. So you need to be aware of, if your data is missing something, how do you account for it? In video 3, we showed how to use that only using DAX. There's many reasons why you only want to use DAX versus PowerQuery. Personally, I think PowerQuery was the way to go. And that's actually the topic of the fourth video, is that we showed how to use PowerQuery to account for missing days. And we accounted for the missing days by saying, in both the DAX and PowerQuery version, that whatever the last reported date that had a currency rate, bring that in. So if we had a currency on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, but nothing on the 4th, we said bring in the 3rd. Now it's important to remember that just because it's the day before, it doesn't mean it always has a currency rate. So you can't assume that if you don't have a data point on the 4th, you have one on the 3rd. If it's the weekend that's missing the date, obviously Saturday and Sunday won't have a rate. So if you're on Sunday and you say give me Saturdays and there's no Saturday date, you're still having missing data. So both these methods used the last available rate whenever it happened. It doesn't have to be the previous day, and more often than not, it won't be. We showed that in PowerQuery, when you do a little comparison of how fast the DAX query is when using the method in PowerQuery of filling in the last date or using DAX, the PowerQuery method was much faster because it's less lifting for the DAX engine to do. And in our fifth and final video here, we're going to cover a couple of different things here. We're going to assume that for section 1 here, that we don't want to use the actual rate on that day. For whatever reason, I'm just kind of going over some topics here that could spark other thoughts or whatnot. But for the first topic, we're going to go over that we just want to use the running month-to-date average. So if you have a rate on the 1st, the average is obviously just wherever that rate is. Then on the 2nd, it's the average of those 2 days and so forth. Then building off that, we are going to show how to use the running monthly average for missing days, but use the actual rate if there's one existing. So instead of using the last reported rate for a missing day, we're going to show how to use the running monthly average to that day for the missing days. And going along those lines as well, a couple of different things we're going to show is instead of using the day of the rate for whatever we're converting, we want to use the start of the month or the end of the month. Now, if that might not be entirely reasonable, because if you have sales that occur at the end of the month, I'm not sure how you're going to convert them using the first of the month's rate, because those are going to change daily. But this is more to show different ways of tackling this issue. And maybe that's the way your business wants to handle that, and that's fine. You just have to know and explain to your users of what they're looking at and what's really being shown. It's on you as the developer to make the end product reasonable and make it understandable for your users. Confusion and then people making decisions off that confusion is recipe for disaster. And the last topic we're going to cover in video 5 here is we have all these different methods of filling in missing data. Instead of having a table that has, I believe it's like 4 or 5 of these different ways of handling it, we're going to show how to have one measure on a table and have a user just click a slicer to show which one, to show the value being converted on whatever they're choosing. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So here is our matrix and the file we've been working with. Right now we're showing the British pound. I just randomly chose a currency here, and the last currency date with date on the rows. So as you can see here, we have a rate for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, all the way to the 8th, and the currency date corresponds to that date in the current filter context. This is all covered in the previous videos, so if that doesn't make sense or not entirely clear, please go back and rewatch those videos and it should clear it up. And then this currency rate missing is just a simple sum of the currency rate coming from the table. I use sum because you always have one row with one currency, so it's only one value. So you can use sum, average, min, max, it doesn't matter. The only thing it would matter is this grand total level, but we don't use this rate anyway because it's going to sum x over the converted rate to get the total. Because this total here, the 19.453, is just the total of all the currency rates, and these are non-additive. They are what they are on that day, and that's it. So as you can see here, we're missing data on the 9th, the 13th, 18th. So without accounting for that, if we have sales that occur on those days, they won't be converted because there's no rate. So it takes your total sales measure and multiplies it by nothing, so you get nothing. And an interesting thing that Microsoft just came out with for Excel, if you take a look here, is they have this new function called stock history. It's a new function. I think it's only available for Office 365. If you're a beta user, or I forget what they call it, something like an in whatever. So they released these. I don't know a lot about it. I saw it pop up and it kind of interested me, so I just real quick went into it. Basically, just give it a ticker, a start date, and an end date, and it populates this array for you. Now, this is the topic of this video. The main issue of this video is to show how to handle the missing rates and missing days. But this just showed that. So when I put the USD British pound, it doesn't populate a rate for Saturday or Sunday. So it goes from the 6th, 7th, skips the 8th and 9th, it picks up in the 10th. So if you're getting your data from maybe this stock history or wherever Microsoft's getting their data from, this could be a common issue. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that, this issue that we're solving for now is, it's a real issue. It's not something that could happen or may happen. It's going to happen. And it's happening right here. So without knowing that, without realizing those days are missing, you might not have realized that when you're converting your metric, whatever it is, you're missing something. So just something interesting, the stock history. If you just Google it, I'm sure you can find some things on it. But that's not the point of this video. I just wanted to show that here, missing date, so we need to account for it. So let's get rid of the Excel and go back to our PowerQuery here, or Power BI. So we're missing data on the 9th, 13th, and the 18th. So first topic I want to cover is I just want the running month-to-date average. Now, it could be quarter-to-date, year-to-date, whatever. It doesn't matter. I just chose month-to-date for this video for demonstration purposes. So I already have it in the matrix here. So month-to-date for all days. So it doesn't matter if there's a rate there or not. I still want the average to that date. So looking at the measure for that one, it's not too bad. We're gonna iterate over the date table with an average x function, and this currency rate missing is simply this measure here, and it's just a simple sum of the fat currency rate. Now, I always use a measure when I'm iterating because you need to have calculated in there to do the context transition. Now, that's not the topic of this video either, but everything's intertwined. So I know there's a bunch of videos on this channel about context transition iterators. So if that wasn't entirely clear, just please go ahead and take a look at some of those videos. But say you didn't have this currency rate with missing measure written, you could write a sum fat currency rate, but just be aware you need to wrap it in a calculate, because when you use a measure like we have here, DAX is smart enough to know that there's a calculate there. It's an implicit calculate, so it invokes that context transition. With that being said, we're just going to use this dates MTD function. That's a time intelligence function. That's a shortcut, so we could write it out to filter all, din date, etc. But I'm going to go ahead and use and leverage the built-in time intelligence of the dates. So we're just going to keep it nice and simple there. But before we put that measure on, before hey, this is working or not working, or maybe we just deploy it, I'm sure it's working, right? We need to be sure that our date table is marked as such. So it's important to do this because it makes the time intelligence functions work correctly. Now, if you don't do this, if you don't mark it as a date table, your time intelligence functions could work, or could work for some of the time, but not all the time. And you might get weird results and not understand why, because you're looking at your measure and you're like, this is right. I looked online and I looked at the forum, everything's right, but why is this not giving me the right answer? Well, just be sure that you're marking this as a date table. So if you're in your grid view here, you go to table tools and mark as date table and make sure that's checked. Now it'll make you confirm or pick a row or column that has unique values, and that's always your date column. I already did this, so we're good to go. So we're just going to check the math on this month average rate to date for all. When I do things like this, I like to just export the raw data to Excel, and I could do it manually in there for a month and check what I get in Excel where I know it's right versus what DAX is putting out, because sometimes DAX can give you some weird or interesting results. The important thing to remember is DAX doesn't ever give you wrong results. It may not be the results you expected, but using the DAX engine and how it works, it always gives correct results. It just needs to be the same as what you're expecting. So if we go ahead and take a look at the table in Excel here. So this last currency day is just the same matrix table here, just in an Excel table format. So we got the last currency date, the currency rate, and the month average to date that was produced by DAX. In my quick Excel format, just do an average to date. So even for the blanks, we're gonna get, okay, that's looking good. And I just do a quick delta of what DAX produces and what Excel produces, and everything's pretty much the same except you get 0.001, and that's just some sort of rounding because there's only 4 decimals, so I'm not gonna worry about that. So I'm gonna say, that's correct. I like how that's working. So we're gonna go ahead and say this monthly average rate to date for all days no matter if it has a rate or not, it's good to go. So then we, say we show our boss or whoever, and they're like, that's interesting, but what about if you fill in the missing rate days with this average, but I want to use the actual rate if one exists? And you say, of course, no problem, because DAX is flexible and fast, and you can do it relatively easy, and it won't be a problem. So that measure is already on this table here. So monthly average to date if missing, actual rate if not missing. Now these names are super long, and you would never or should never have names like this when you deploy something. I did it for demonstration purposes so we can keep everything straight, but you could always come in here and just rename them if you want. I generally don't do that, because when I come back later and I say rename this one here, instead of this long, if missing, I just go, rate. So now we have rate. And I come back in here later, it could be a month later, a year later. I see rate there and I see rate here, and I'm like, well, it's one of these. I'm not sure which one it is, because the name of the measure didn't change. So there's the pros and cons of each. If you know what that's going to correspond to, you can go ahead and name it whatever you want. But I like to keep the name of the measure the same as it's going to be in the table, so we're just going to keep that as is. So here's the measure for monthly average to date if missing, actual rate if not missing. And it's not that bad. So we have last currency date, which is this date here. It's checking to see if you have a currency rate in the current filter context. So the last currency date on the 1st is the 1st, on the 8th is the 8th, and the 9th is nothing. It's blank. So that's a little piece of the puzzle. So we're going to check it to see if the last currency date is blank. I want to use the monthly rate to date for all days, which is the previous measure we did, which is the dates MTD time intelligence function. And then we go back here. If it's not blank, we want the currency rate missing, which is just the currency rate for that day. So to be expected, we have this rate here, which is the actual rate of present or average to the date if missing. So this matches the rate, matches the rate, matches the rate, matches the rate. So what we got here? So we got 0.610, and that matches the monthly to date that we already checked in Excel of all the dates. So that's good. So these will be different. The first couple days might be the same because it's the same rate. So we come down to here. So we got 0.6921 the previous day, but instead of using the last report, we want the average to the date, which is 0.6833. Perfect. So we have those rates. What are we going to do with them? Well, glad you asked. We're going to show you what you're going to do with this information in the next section, but we wanted to cover end of month and start of month. So these are just the simple time intelligence functions of end of month. It's just EO month, end of month, and then start of month. So for the end of the month and start of month, we don't have the rate yet. We will, but not yet. For the monthly average to the date, we have that rate, and we have the monthly average to date if missing, or the actual rate. So that's part of the puzzle. That's about half the puzzle. So we have some dates, we have some rates, excuse me. So we need to figure out, how to get those all working together. And just to show you how flexible this is, we say, we select the euro, and this still works. So here we're missing 2 days of data, so it pulls in 2 days. So if we go here, let's go back to the British pound here for a second. All right, so if you take a look here, we got a new slicer here. We're gonna go ahead and create a table that's not connected to anything. So if you look at our diagram view, we got, here's our rate table, which we haven't gone over yet. We're going to show how that's where that came from. But it's not connected to anything, but somehow it's still populating into here. So we have the start of month, end of month rate, last reported, and the monthly average to date for blanks, and the monthly average to date no matter what. So how is that working there? It's actually a pretty cool little trick. So first thing you want to do is create the table. Now there's a couple ways to do this. I chose to use the DATATABLE function here. For me, I find it easier to use actually than using the data enter data in PowerQuery, or I think you can do it in here, or using it directly in Power BI here. So it doesn't matter how this gets in there, but for me, I just did a new calculated table and just used this DATATABLE function here. All it is you're going to set your columns, the name, and the type, and then you're going to create a list of list. So this is the column. I'm sorry, this is the row, and then I have a sort in here because I want to have different sort order. Otherwise, it would be just alphabetical. I believe that's how that does it. So for me, it made sense. I want start of the month to be in the beginning, end of the month next, last reported, and then it doesn't matter the order. It's whatever makes the most sense to you. But it's important to have the sort in there, so when you go into your table after you create it, click into here, and you do click here and you go sort. So it's going to sort this rate column by the sort here. So let's say I just change this to 2 and change this to 1. So instead of start of month, end of month, I want end of month, start of month. So let's give that a second, and hopefully it's switched here. So end of month's always first, start of the month is second, and etc. Let's go ahead and just change that back. So here's the data table producing the actual table. So here's your column headers with your column types, and then here's your list of lists filling in. Like I said, you could use this, you could use PowerQuery, use Excel, import data, doesn't matter. Just need to get this in here somehow, because we're going to use this as a slicer, and if you're using something as a slicer, it has to physically exist. You can't use a calculated table that's in a measure, because that's only memory, and then once it's used and DAX is done, it's gone. So it has to physically exist in your table. So start of month is back, end of month here. So here's our table. This table here is just the actual currency rate, if there's one for that day, then here's the missing. It's kind of a demonstration to show here's our quote unquote raw data, and here's this table here is filled in with the missing data various ways. So the cool thing here is, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 methods of accounting for missing currency rates. But here, I don't have 5 measures. I have 1 measure. I got selected currency rate here, and it produces 5 measures, and it's flexible. So here's euro, my euro table turns here, so 27th, 28th, we have data. All right, so that's one of my favorite features. I mean, I love that I can get 5 different outcomes with 1 measure. Well, I should say 1 final measure. It takes a couple of measures to build it, but let's see what we're going to do here. So select the currency rate. Let's see where this is. So it's a little long, but it's not too bad. It's not too complicated. I know sometimes it can become a little overwhelming, or just you throw your hands up, be like, I'll stick to Excel or whatever because I know it. I found for myself, if I break things down piece by piece and try to figure out how I would solve it versus going online just seeing how someone else solved it. I find that easier. But what's important is you have the foundation. You see how someone solved a particular problem or issue, and maybe you can leverage that same type of thing, or it gets the ball rolling. So without further ado, let's dive into the selected currency rate. So like to set variables. It can help performance depending on what you're using it for. But for me, it also just keeps things clearer and more concise. You just need to be aware that variables are populated where they're defined and not where they're used. This becomes an issue with iterators, because when you're iterating, you're inside a table, and if your variable was defined outside that table, it's not going to change like you think it would. That'll probably be a topic for a different video coming up, but keep that in mind. If you have a variable and you have an iterator or something's just not making sense, I found it helpful to take that variable out and plug in the actual measure and see if that's what you get. See if that solves your problem. And if it does, you can see, maybe just keep that measure in instead of a variable, or different ways to handle that. But that's going off on a different topic. I don't want to go in too far into that right now. So just say if you're not getting the outcome you expect, like I said earlier, the DAX is never wrong. It can produce, and it does produce, outcomes we don't expect. That's just one of the troubleshooting ways that I find helpful. Sorry for that little tangent, but so let's go back to this measure here. So we have a measure here that's currency selected, which is just a simple selected value. So I have a DimCurrency rates table, and we went over that, I think, in video 2 on how to format. So my slicers, my filters, whatever, is always coming from my dimension tables, because you don't want to filter directly on your bigger fact tables, because you will take a performance hit. You want to use your smaller dimension tables, lookup tables, whatever you want to call them, to filter your bigger fact tables. So all this currency selected measure does is say, what is the currency selected in the current filter context? If there's more than one selected, just give me USD. Now, this is just a demonstration, so maybe you don't want anything shown if there's more than one selected, or maybe that's not even an issue because you can turn your slicer to only say single select. But say we don't. Say we forget to turn that off, or they're both on. So if I have, oops. Sorry about that. Okay. So if I have euro and pound, it still works. Because what's happening here is that I have this full name as a currency full name on columns. It could be on rows. It doesn't matter. It just needs to be on your table. Because when this measures in this quote-unquote cell here, for lack of a better term, it knows the selected currency is euro. And likewise, it knows that this selected currency is British pound. But what's going to happen if I take this full name, the currency full name, off the table? It's going to go back to US dollar. I didn't account for the US dollar for missing data because it's always going to be 1, so I'm not worried about that right now. So that's just showing that, if there's not a filter on your rows or columns coming from your dimension table of your currency rate, it's either going to error out or default to something else. So let's go ahead and put this full name back on the table. Let's flip that around, drill down, and then go back to British pound. Okay. So back to our measure of the selected currency rate. So we know what currency we're in the current filter context. Now we need to know what rate type we're in the current filter context. Now let's go ahead and find our rate type selected. And as you probably guessed, just a simple selected value from our rate table rate type, which is the table we created in here. So this is telling us what the currency, or excuse me, what the current rate type we want is in the current filter context. And likewise, if we didn't have all these, start, end, last reported, etc., the rate type coming from the rate type table in our matrix, which means without these column headers or row, it doesn't have to be columns. We need to account if there's more than one in that current filter context. Just like we just did with the currency. If there's more than one, there's no one selected value. DAX doesn't know what to do, so it's going to error. So in this example, we told it that if there is more than one selected, go ahead and just always give me the last reported. It doesn't matter what you put there as long as it makes sense to you and your users know what they're looking at. Now, a lot of the time, if you don't want that to happen, you'd only make the slicer only have one value, or select one value only. But when you want to compare, as you'll see in the next section, the different types of conversions, you need to have the ability to select more than one rate type at a time. So you need to either have something from your dimension table on your matrix or your table or whatever you're using, or you need to be sure that the slicer is set to only allow one choice. No right or wrong, just as long as you know what your users are going to try to do, or what they're going to want to see, or you have some sort of pop-up or some sort of warning that says, hey, you selected more than one, we didn't know what to do, so here's last reported, why don't you try selecting only one, or something along those lines. So back to our selected currency rate measure here. So as you hopefully you remember from the previous tab, we had the rate. Let's go back to it actually. This monthly average, either to date for blanks or all the time, we already have the rates, so we don't need to do any sort of lookup. We don't need to decide, go to this date, look it up. We don't need to do that like we do in our other methods of our last reported date. It's already done. So let's go back to this rate type selected. Oops, excuse me. Which one is it? Select the currency rate, sorry. So this rate type selected variable is more looking to see if the last reported currency date, start of month, or end of month was chosen, because those are just actual dates. We don't have a rate yet for those. So we're gonna use a switch, which all it does is, takes away the nested ifs. DAX actually converts it to nested ifs on the back end, but switch is much easier to use. So this rate type selected, remember it's the selected value coming from our rate type table that we created earlier. And it's just going to go, if it's last reported, I want the last reported currency date, start of month, end of month date, start of month date. So those bring in actual dates. So we just have dates in there. We don't have any sort of rate or anything yet. So those are just raw dates. So it's part of the puzzle to get to the final result, but it's not there yet. So we do another variable, which is the rate. Now for this one, we need to account for if the monthly average to date for blank and monthly average to date was chosen. Now remember, with those, we already have the currency rate for those. So we don't need to do any lookups or anything. That's already done. So we use another lookup value, or excuse me, another switch function here. I use SWITCHTRUE here. So whenever it's true, it's going to stop. So if the rate type selected is monthly average to date, we want this measure here. And if it's monthly average to date, we want this measure here. So it's going to iterate through and see, which one triggers true. Because remember, these, lines 17 and 18 here already have a rate. So we don't need to do no lookups for that one. So that's if a monthly average to date is selected, it knows to go there and it just stops. Now, if that's not true, if it's not either one of these selected, it's going to trigger this final lookup. This final lookup takes the currency rate selected, which is up here, which is this variable here. So it knows what currency we are in the current filter context. And this rate type selected variable, which is the one here, which is a date collected in this switch value here. And it goes to the fat currency rate table because it goes there to look up a date. So that's one function, and it's, say 26, 27 lines. That's referencing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other measures. So it's not this infinitely complex, code of this selected currency rate, but it all just builds on each other. They're like a little tiny brick started, then you start getting, bigger and bigger, and before you know it, you got 7 or 8 measures referenced in one measure, and things are just more convenient to troubleshoot and keep in line and everything. So if you look here, we go start a month. Since start a month is selected in this current filter context, it quote unquote knows. So start a month was triggered here. So this is storing start a month of that actual date. So this is storing 1/1/2016. And it's storing British pound. So it's British pound here. Rate type selected. Oh, we got 1/1/2016. And then it goes down to this rate variable here. And we're looking for the first true. So that's rate type selected wasn't this one, it wasn't this one, so it has to be this final version here. So this is saying go to my fat currency rates table. And I want to bring in the actual cross rate. And since I have a lot of tickers in there, I think 10 to 15, with a lot of dates, I need to tell it what date and what ticker. So the ticker is the currency selected in our variable here. And our date, since we didn't choose a monthly average, is the date gathered in this switch. Which is why in all these results you have something different. So in the first, start a month and the last reported, and the averages are all going to be the same. So start a month is the same from the first all the way down. End of month is the same, the last rate here, make sure that's right. So the last rate end of month was 0.720 and 0.702, sorry. Which is why I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense to be able to convert on the first of the month sales of the end of month rate. I'm sorry, that would actually make sense because you could hold it in cash and convert it in the month. I don't know if it wouldn't make sense to convert, or couldn't make sense to convert the last month sales on the 31st of the first start of the month rate because it's 0.6768 and the actual rate at the end of the month is 0.7020. So you really can't convert going back in time. But maybe for what you want to measure, it does make sense, or any numerous types of things. And then let's see, the last reported here. So we go 16th to the 18th. Oops. There we go. So the 17th, it was 0.7015. Last reported brings in that number. Perfect. Then the monthly average for blank, we checked it on here, so we're happy with those. And then, if we just click around here, it just it changes what's in this here. So you can just have a couple here. And we bring in the euro too. So look at that. How cool is that? So you got two currencies, and in this example, 3 different ways of accounting for how to convert them. But we get rid of them. You got all of them in there, and do some formatting, but they're all accounted for. And this will work for all the currencies. Now in this example, I just have excuse me, pound and euros, but in our currency rates table we have a bunch of tickers. Actually, not in this one. I took those out. Maybe it's this one. Anyway, yeah, it would work for a numerous amount of currencies. So if you go to the final version of it here, how cool is this? So let's see. Let's make that bigger. Let's just do pound for a second. So these are our total sales converted based on start of the month, end of month, last reported, average to blank, or monthly average. So you can see you get all these metrics, all these converted sales or whatever you want to measure pretty instantaneously. You got 5 different ways of accounting for it. And you can let your users, select different ways of doing it. And then, going just, you can bridge off these. You can show, a difference between the 2 selected, or, the highest or the lowest, or, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, but the basics are there. You have a way to account for missing days based on the last reported. You can use an average. You can use start of month, end of month. You can use a median. You can use, the start of the month to the first, to the fifth, to the middle of the month, and then after the middle of the month, use then. There's so many different ways you can go about it. For the purposes of this video, and we're running a little long as it is, I wasn't gonna go into how to do every sort of combination, but it should get you thinking how do I account for different things? Maybe the last reported currency rate's the way to go, and if that's the way you want to go, I would just use PowerQuery. I'd check that video out because it's just much faster. But if you want to do these different things like averages to date, or medians or whatever, I would stick with DAX, because I found PowerQuery to be slower and quite frankly cumbersome to do to date functions or calculations. So if we just change this to euros, you can see it formats it. Now the only catch on this formatting, not to go off topic here, is that when you do this formatting, it does change it to a text value. But sometimes I've noticed that if you do export this to Excel, either through CSV or just selecting and export and copy and paste, depending on how you formatted it, Excel might still read it as a number. But in Power BI, if you want to do some sort of conditional formatting, it's going to be tough because it sees it as a text value. So if this is just formatted sales, so this measure here is called formatted sales. It won't let me do it because it's a text, so it's not going to even let me do it. But if you do it on converted sales, let's do converted sales, no missing. It will let you, because converted sales, depending on which way you're going about it, it produces a number. You're not converting that number yet to the appropriate formatting. You're converting it to the appropriate currency. You're just not converting it to the format. So that's kind of a workaround to get conditional formatting on your correctly formatted currencies. we got British pound here, and then here's just, not sure if this chart makes a whole bunch of sense, but it shows the 5 different methods and the different types of sales for January of 2016. So you can see, they're all close, but they're all different. So what's correct? There's no one answer for that. It all depends on what your business requirements are, what your end users are used to seeing or what they want to see. For me, it'd probably be either, end of month or last reported, but that's just my opinion, and that's just what it is. It's an opinion. So I know this video ran a little long, but this is the final video in the series here of, converting currencies. Covered a lot of different topics here. I hope you guys got some out of this video and the previous 4. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. I'll tell you, there's a bunch of great people producing a lot of great content. I know I learned a bunch from other people, so I hope you learned something from here, and feel free to comment or what have you, and I look forward to the next one. Take care, everyone.